Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Liz Laporte. I'm the founder of Laporte Education Advising, and I'm really pleased to have Kahren Eloyan here, who is a former student of mine and an alum of Acalanes High School. And he's currently a junior at USC, and I've invited him to talk a little bit to parents and students about, what it's like to be at this, elite university. We'll talk a little bit about sort of preparation that he may have gone through and any advice that he has for students and families. So welcome, Corinne, and thank you again for taking the time. I know this is, end of March, it's busy and architecture students are always busy. So I really appreciate your coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, sure. So let's start with, tell us a little bit. I know you, but tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of your maybe your high school experiences. Maybe we start there at the beginning.
Yeah, so I'm a first generation immigrant from Armenia, and I'm studying architecture right now. My father himself is an architect as well, so it's a little bit of the family business we're hoping to continue. Um, and in terms of preparation and stuff like that, because we're first generation immigrants and my parents went to college in the Soviet Union, the system was very different. So a lot of the preparation was a little bit of us stumbling around the in the dark, as it were. But one of the things that I sort of subconsciously did, which I found helped me out later on, is I found some activities that were of meaningful importance to me, and I kind of stuck with them throughout my time in high school. So, for example, I wrote for the Acalanes newspaper. I wrote for Blueprint from my sophomore to senior year. I worked in various diversity initiatives, and then my senior year, I was in the diversity sort of I guess task force of our leadership class. And so those are things that I think helped me. And then generally just being as rigorous as possible about you know keeping the grades at a high standard. But I didn't like inundate myself with extracurriculars, as it were. It was more so I found a couple things that were of interest to me, and I really honed those skills.
Mhm. Yeah. If I can sort of jump in, I'd like to sort of second that. When students think about activities and, oh my gosh, I have to do activities for college, I think that's a little bit misleading. Like you said, sort of very focused but consistent kinds of activities and interests where you're sort of building your profile, as it were. That's
Yeah,
really what's going to stand out rather than a little piecemeal here or a little bit of that there. And I just also wanted to echo what you said about starting, pretty much right away in high school, not waiting until you're a junior, like, all of a sudden I better do some, activities that are meaningful. So I appreciate what you're saying about, sort of starting and going through the full, the full 4 years.
yeah. And one quick point I also wanted to make is it's not necessarily essential that what you do in high school is what you do in college, because for example, writing or cartooning for the school newspaper is not necessarily germane to architecture. But the important thing is that it shows that you have an interest, and you develop that interest. And then obviously later on outside of high school you can pursue, you know well, everyone changes, so you can pursue what you find interesting later on.
Right. And if you can remember back to high school, if you can kind of develop or describe your activities a little bit more, I think they really hung together and they were interesting. Can you kind of outline what you were doing those 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, so I did a lot of sort of architecture related things. So I did a number of summer camps. I kind of did odds and ends for my family in terms of their architectural work and aiding them and some of the things that they were doing. My grandmother was writing a book about architectural history in her home country, so I helped her edit the English language text, which was sort of an intersection of my interest in writing and architecture. Um, and then some of the things that I pursued sort of outside of architecture was um, I I made a couple of short films with friends and stuff like that. So kind of um, pursued design in a more production design standpoint there. And I was just, having no budget. It's like, how can we make our buddy's garage look like a bunker or something like that? Um, so I think that those were the main things. I did water polo for the first 2 years of high school, but then from then on, that sort of fell by the wayside. So I think
Yeah.
those are the big ones.
The big ones, yeah, and I guess I want to also kind of elaborate on that. La Miranda and San Francisco to a degree is a lot about sports, right? And I know kids love it. I was an athlete myself, even in college, but I think that idea of sports is going to really kind of make you stand out, maybe kind of a misnomer, as it were.
Yeah,
So I appreciate what you said, that you like doing it, but then it wasn't something that you took throughout your high school. And then
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was also just gonna say, like, I think that sports in college versus sports in high school are very different beasts, and I think that the expectation of doing something recreationally and then sort of having that continue through college is not always feasible for a lot of people. I'm sure there's some people who make the jump no problem, but a lot of the people that I know who aren't athletes, they do sort of like club sports and stuff like that, or they do more recreationally. But when they were applying, I know that the athletics wasn't the sort of linchpin of their applications.
And as I recall, also one of the things that stood out to me was, I believe you had been writing some letters to the newspaper about the Armenian genocide. I believe, if my memory serves me.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
yeah, and so I just kind of wanted to mention, and you can certainly elaborate, that doing things outside of the school environment, really demonstrated initiative, interest, and kind of a personal meaning for you, personal passion for you, which I think well, was well served for
yeah,
your application. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I'm fortunate to have like a very deep connection to my ethnic and cultural roots. So that was something that well served me outside of school, and I think that's a lot of people in Loma Linda can also call upon that sort of activities outside of school, and just in general things that are germane to their community, whether that be religious or cultural, doesn't matter. But having that sort of, for lack of a better term, I guess service, is a good thing because it shows that you sort of think in a broader context beyond just your familial unit.
Right. And I guess that may be a good sort of segue to talking a little bit about what you cared to write about for your, both for your Common App and for your UC essays. I recall, having a wonderful time working with you around your memories about Armenia and your family. And I think that was so personal for you, and it was also something that was distinctive.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to recall specifically, but yeah, there's a lot of expressing for myself personally. My journey in America has been, my parents sacrificed a lot in bringing us over here, and so kind of it was me reckoning with, now that I've had all these things, done for me. It's kind of picking up the torch and running with it, and sort of how do I move forward given everything that's happened.
Mhm.
And I sort of tied that into my family's history with the very tumultuous history of our people in the last 100 years or so.
Right, right.
But yeah, that I think that was the main thrust of kind of placing myself within the broader context of, the changes that my family has experienced and sort of what I can do to move forward and advance both my, the situation of my family and the situation of my people at large.
I think that's key, that that idea of contributing or participating, not just taking it in, but actually giving back or figuring out how to go forward, like you say.
Hmm.
Um, let's change topics a little bit. So USC, I mean, it's an elite university. It's one of the lowest acceptance rates in the country, I think,
God.
maybe along with Stanford. So what's it like there? First of all, yeah, what's it like for you to be a student there?
Um, well, it's kind of funny. I think my experience, our architecture can be a little bit insular, so it almost feels like a little bit of a smaller school for me. But yeah, USC is a massive, massive school, and it's a massive school in a massive city. So it was a little bit of a culture shock for me coming down from Lafayette because the scale of the Bay Area is completely distinct from Los Angeles. But one of the nice things of having a school of that size is there's so many places to look to find people who you connect to. So I was very fortunate when I applied to housing. There are these things called special interest housing where if you have an interest in art or cinematography or something like that, you're placed with sort of like-minded interested people. And so when I was assigned to my housing, I was assigned with a close friend of mine here from Lafayette. We'd made movies together back home, and so I sort of had a group outside of my major because everyone on that floor was they were filmmakers, and then I found my people within architecture as well. So that was really nice, and it's also I found there's a lot of connections that you don't expect to make at a school of its size, but there were certain people in my major, for example, who they lived all over the world, but they knew somebody that I knew, or somebody very tangentially in my housing, someone from the La Marinda area. So um, I, I personally felt that like there was a very nice sense of community that kind of mitigates the shock of being like this is an enormous school, and I say that was someone who's I've realized in my time at USC a little more on the introverted side. Um, so it was it was a lot at first, but you kind of have to throw yourself, into the wave and kind of find where the river takes you, as it were.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, that's a big transition from La Marinda. There's, we talk about it as a sort of a bubble, right? And so sort of popping that bubble and entering into a new environment is a very big transition. And it sounds like you found people, like-minded people. Did do you know about maybe you've not had the opportunity, or maybe you have about sort of services for students, student services, maybe tutoring, or other kinds of services that students can access.
Yeah, there's a ton, and um, I I would caution anybody listening just to say that I haven't necessarily made use of all of them, so that I'm sure there's more than I know. But a size of or school of USC size, there's one in particular. I believe it's called the Korchak Center for Learning, where they have a lot of resources in terms of managing workload and sort of study habits and stuff like that. So you can go help. Um, I found my sort of counselor within my major to be very helpful, very communicative in terms of, when there are issues, how getting them resolved quickly and stuff like that. But yeah, there's absolutely no shortage I found of resources at USC, and it being a very multidisciplinary place. You have areas of psychology, architecture, there's law, business, medicine, all that sort of intersecting. There's um, there's a lot of opportunities to go and find something that you need.
Talking to other students, uh, they all say ask for help, right? You have people there, you have mentors, advisors, resident assistants.
Yeah.
admin, faculty. I mean, there's no dearth of people who want you to succeed.
Yeah,
Has that been your
absolutely.
experience too? Hmm.
And I've noticed people don't really make use of office hours very often for one reason or another. So one of the things that's kind of surprising to me about USC, is that, just some of the courses, despite the like really immense size, like a lot of GE courses, I've seen, almost 60, 80 people in some of the GE courses. Um, because people don't really attend those sort of office hours and stuff like that, it's not difficult to get a hold of a teacher. And I guess I'm also a little bit spoiled in that the way that architecture is set up, our main studio courses, there's one professor per every maybe 12, 13 students. So within our studio groups, during class, you always have face-to-face time with your professor. There's no way that you don't see your professor unless, during the pandemic you're working asynchronously. But hopefully that, for the people applying right now, that shouldn't be a problem for very long.
And you're mentioning GE requirements. For those who may not be familiar with that, I would love it if you wanted to sort of outline that. I do have some students, and I think there may be a preponderance of thought about it's so important to choose a major before you go to college. But actually, the US system is set up with those general education requirements for students to actually, to explore and to have some flexibility and choose later on. If you wanted to kind of go through that GE kind of aspect, that would be great.
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, the idea that you have to kind of go in with a major is a little bit erroneous. Again, I'm fortunate in that I knew very early on what it was that I wanted to do. So for me, GEs um, have been really helpful in that the ones that I've taken that I've really loved have had nothing to do with architecture, but have enriched me a lot. Like I think I took first semester, one of my classes was Russian prison camp literature, which was a very depressing class, like content wise, but it was really interesting in terms of talking about psychology, and in a really odd way when discussing these, imprisoned peoples, that ended up kind of influencing the way I think about architecture a little bit, which was kind of funny.
Interesting.
But yeah, I definitely have. Um, I've had friends who were a little bit adrift, and through their through their sort of GE courses, um, they were able to find a little bit better of a direction. Conversely, one of the things that I found in my time is, if um, if you get one of, so in essence, when you're signing up for courses, you get a specific slot, a time slot. It's I think like a lottery or something, and there will have been students who sign up before you most of the time. So your choices are not necessarily limitless, and there have been situations in which I've sort of had uh, to take a specific GE, not because I necessarily wanted it to, but because I needed to fulfill certain credits, and have it fit in with my schedule, because the sort of major requirements of architecture are essentially immutable. So you kind of have to fit things around it. Um, so my personal experience has been, there's been one or two courses where I've definitely felt like I wasn't predisposed to give my best to that class, just by virtue of my major being very, very time consuming. But yeah, just be disciplined, be judicious when selecting your courses, and take everything into account. Take in what time the course is. Look at it in the broader scheme of your schedule, what other courses you have around it, because I sort of signed up willy-nilly my first semester out of a 8 o'clock class on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and thankfully I ended up really enjoying the class, so it wasn't a problem. But on the first day, falling out of bed and going to an 8 a.m. class, for some people is an imposition. So um, you just have to be kind of nimble or clever about the way that you organize those things.
Yeah, and that's all really helpful to hear. What kinds of academic sort of academics have you had to engage in terms of papers and presentations? I guess apart from the architecture for now, just sort of the norm, the sort of the GE kind of
Yeah.
class, humanities, etc. What was the load like?
I've so for my GE courses, I've never really had presentations. Um, Quizzes and papers are the norm from what I've seen, particularly in some of the more reading heavy courses. I've noticed there's a lot of writing, which I always felt reasonably well prepared for. And there are two required writing courses that students are supposed to take during their time. There's, I believe, writing 315 and then writ 340, I believe. So depending on when you take that, that might also help you kind of ease into the college, the sort of main of college. Um, but yeah, there's midterms. So some classes will have only one midterm, some will have multiple midterms spaced out at different intervals. So depending on depending on the way that the midterms are sort of cut, you might have to study a lot, you might have to study a little bit. I've found, note taking is generally is a good tack to take, but also kind of knowing when not to take notes, because there's some classes in which you could take notes all the livelong day. You're not going to retain that information necessarily as effectively. You have to just be judicious about when when you need to take information down and when to take it in and such. um, so yeah, I don't believe college in that respect is all that dissimilar from high school in my personal experience.
Mhm. So
Pardon.
yeah, no, so architecture, so how has that been for you? What is it that you're doing in your own career path, and how's that working out, the whole architecture situation for you?
um it's it's immense. It's a lot. Well, in terms of my career trajectory, hopefully this will be the faster question, so I'll answer that one first. I hope to graduate and work with my father. He's right now overseas, so I'm hoping to kind of set up the American base of our studio here in the States, and then I hope to be able to do kind of production design for film and television and movies, which I have done for some friends so far in college, and I really enjoyed that. So I'd like to continue. In terms of architecture, it's it's been completely different to anything I've ever experienced, from just a workload perspective, but also kind of the way in which it's taught. So as I referenced before, we have these within our larger cohort, we have these smaller studios, and we're paired up with a specific professor. And so the way that each of our days in architecture go, you'll meet for a specific amount of time. The professor will critique your work. You'll iterate, develop, meet with them, and so on and so forth. And the workload has been immense in a way that I thought was unprecedented. Certainly nothing I experienced in college, or in high school rather. But it's also been really rewarding because I've had a really broad variety of perspectives and of experiences that have informed my work, because I've had some older gentlemen be professors. I've had some, younger, really high-powered women architects who are on the up and up in the Los Angeles area, and I believe almost all of our studio professors are either practicing architects or were practicing architects at some point. So just experientially, it's been really interesting. And it's what I've noticed is um, our education isn't so much the nuts and bolts of this is how you prepare a town planning document. This is how you submit. This is how you, kind of back alley cajole, recalcitrant town planning authorities. It's more of teaching you how to think and perceive space, kind of the ideation. And then there are sort of ancillary courses that then teach you this is how you draw a wall section, these are the layers and everything, and the sort of structural calculations that come along. So it's a really broad, wide base of information that you have to cope with. But if you have the love for for the subject, for the work, for the process of it, I've found that's what sort of keeps me through it, even when the when the work is like, why am I doing this? I could have been a business major or something.
You know, I know we have some folks who are interested in computer science, and uh, can you talk a little bit to how you're using? Is it CAD? How much sort of the computer side of things are you having to use
Yeah,
or want
absolutely.
to? Yeah.
So for our architecture things, it's almost entirely computer based, especially now with distance learning. We learn AutoCAD our first year, and then in second semester, first year, we learn our 3D software Rhino, which is kind of what we run with. And in parallel, we learn Illustrator, AutoCAD, InDesign, all those sort of Adobe suites of products. And so aside from those very boilerplate ones, it's kind of it's at your discretion the extent to which you use technology or different softwares. It's kind of open ended. Um, for me personally, I really enjoy hand sketching, and so I do a lot of that just to work through my design ideas and stuff. And when we're in person, there's a lot of model making, um, and it's kind of cool because we have a laser cutter. So using the laser cutter and kind of learning how to integrate that into the workflow has been really rewarding, because the complexity of the models that you can construct, it really, really goes up. But yeah, mostly it's the general workflow is, you model something in 3D in Rhino, you kind of take your 2D views, export it from Rhino into Illustrator, make it super pretty, present it to the jurors and to to your studio professor, and hope that they like it.
Nice. Nice. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're getting a really, really rich education, and I know you're going to be just successful just out of the gate
Thank you.
there.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I'm sure that. Can you talk a little bit about summertime internships? How is USC set up for that? I imagine it's very active in terms of helping students with making connections to the LA community, the business community, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are regular firm fairs both for architecture and then beyond, just in general. Through the main quad, there's employers come up, and you can approach their stands and so forth. So there's a lot of networking that goes on. It's also um, and this is sort of switching back to the more architecture focused thing. If you make a really good impression on a particular professor, they might help you out with getting an internship, or you might then become an intern. And one of my friends had a really good relationship with one of her professors, and she was then hired, and
Mhm.
it seems like one day is going to take over her professor's firm when the professor retires. So
Wow.
she ingratiated herself beautifully.
Mhm.
But yeah, the networking aspect is something where it's really hard to argue with USC in terms of networking opportunities, and that's also something that you will get the exact amount of mileage that you put in to that. So if a lot of what I've noticed, like the business students, when they're going to the firm fairs, they'll wear a suit, make the best impression, so forth. If you engage with those things and you sort of become an active participant, you can get you can get internships and so forth. um, if you don't, you'll have a summer and you'll have to work odd jobs or something like that. Um, it is exactly as you approach it.
Yeah, as much as you put into it is what you kind of get out of it, right?
Precisely.
And I
Yeah.
that's probably kind of a motto, if you will, for your education in general. What you put into it,
Yeah.
either whether it's USC or UCLA or community college, that's probably
Yeah.
something that all of
Absolutely.
us just should remember, especially during the pandemic.
Hmm.
So Kahren, just lastly, would you could you it's probably a little bit difficult, but could you sort of say what kinds of students might really enjoy USC? And maybe that'll be our last question, unless there are any questions from the audience.
Yeah. So me personally, I see USC, and this is a generalization, but I do see it as a school with a lot of outgoing personalities. There's a lot of people engaging with one another, and obviously, there's every type of person there. But for myself personally, as a slightly more introverted individual, it was a lot at first.
Mhm.
But I also think people who are really kind of focused or know their interests or quite driven will succeed at SE, because I've seen people come in as freshmen, sort of immediately find something that clicked with them and then pursue it really aggressively. I have a lot of friends who, um, you know, came to USC, learned something, and then sort of started a business from that. And that's not just my business major people that I know, but it's also architects and musicians.
Mhm.
I have a lot of There's a really big fashion design sort of culture at USC, which was a little bit surprising. So I think if your game, or if you have something that you're like really really passionate about, USC is a good place, because the size of the school means that you can find a connection, or you can find an opportunity that's going to help you a lot. And I also think, just in terms of um, know what kind of an environment you like. If you're really used to Lafayette and you've never been outside really Lafayette very much, or the Bay Area, Los Angeles is going to be a tough sell, because the scale of the city is completely unlike anything else, and you have to be prepared for that. It was shocking to me. I think LA is like 60 square miles odd, something like that. So um, if that's something that's gonna bother you, it behooves you to sort of go out into the city, explore it, sort of find places that are yours, or go out with friends. You can bond with them, and you get a greater understanding of the urban environment. You feel less alienated, which is something that I struggled with at first. Um, and you can dial back the culture shock and make it your place. And yeah, again, USC being as big as it is, I'm confident that most any type of people can find
Mhm.
somebody that they can click with and sort of do all of
Mhm.
that.
Are you uh, it sounds like you're happy there. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like to be at a smaller liberal arts college, for instance?
um, to be entirely honest, I haven't. I personally like big cities. In spite of me being shocked at how large LA is,
Yeah.
I do like the sort of larger metropolis aspect of it.
Mhm.
So a lot of the other sort of schools that I've thought about, like, oh, what if I went there? I kind of invariably find myself realizing that they're in bigger sort of metropolitan areas, and they're kind of bigger schools in and of themselves. I personally like that there's variety, because I'm a person with a lot of interests outside of just architecture.
Right.
So having access to something beyond that sort of more narrow focus is quite important to me.
Okay. Well, it's been really great to talk to you, and I'm just personally, I love to see you again, and it was always
Yeah,
such a
likewise.
pleasure to work with you, and I
Uh,
really enjoyed it, and I enjoy hearing what you're doing now, and again, I'm sure you're going to just have just success after success after you graduate. And by the way, will you be going on for a master's, or are you going to go into business? Do you have that planned out yet?
um, not fully. I do kind of have ideations of getting a master's and then becoming an architectural professor. That would be nice at some point. But
Yeah.
I'm
It,
undecided as yet. We'll
uh,
we'll see. Um,
right.
but yeah, it's exciting. Thank you so much for thinking of me and for you know
Yeah. No.
communicating with me still after all this
Yeah.
time.
No, thank you again, and I hope to be able to see you, sometime around Lafayette after
Yeah,
everything
likewise.
settles down, and so I'll let you go back to your projects, and I really appreciate your being there. So thank you again.
Yeah, of course. And good luck to whoever's listening to this. It's as stressful as a process as it can be. The applications and everything. People tend to wind up exactly where they belong, whether it's a quick route or a short one. So, the stakes are what you make it. So just try and take it easy as much as possible. And again, good luck to all of you. I hope you have wonderful times.
Great advice. Thank you again.
Yeah, of course, Mr. Park. Take care.
Bye bye. Well, thank you again for joining us. It's been a wonderful 45 minutes with Eloyan, a former student of mine, student who's now at USC, that is, and he's majoring in architecture. So if you have any questions about your own application process, admissions journey, for our next webinar.